My name is Mara Ellison, and on the morning my parents dragged me into court, I realized just how far they were willing to go to rewrite the truth. The courtroom buzzed with reporters, their cameras trained on my mother councilwoman Caroline Ellison, who stood at the plaintiff's table with trembling hands and perfectly timed tears. She'd always known how to perform for an audience. "My daughter," she told the judge. Voice cracking, beautifully manipulated an elderly woman and stole millions that weren't meant for her. The room reacted exactly the way she wanted. Gasps, murmurs, sympathetic nods. My father rested a comforting hand on her shoulder. My brother Noah bowed his head like he was grieving, and Judge Mallory Pierce, who had been smiling warmly at my mother moments earlier, leaned forward as if already convinced. I had seen this scene before. Not in a courtroom, but at every dinner table, every campaign event, every moment of my childhood where truth took a back seat to image. So I stood up, not quickly, not dramatically, just with a calmness that sank into the room like cold water. I reached into my bag, pulled out a small silver USB drive, and placed it gently on the defense table. It clicked against the wood, sharp, clear, unmistakable. "Your Honor," I said, steady and unshaken. "Before we continue, there's something you should disclose." Judge Pierce's smile tightened. "You should disclose," I repeated, "your real connection to my mother." Silence. Reporters froze mid-breath. My mother's face flickered. Not fear, not guilt, but recognition. She knew exactly what I had uncovered. She just never expected me to say it out loud. The judge's gavel slipped in her grasp, and for the first time in that courtroom, every eye turned to me. Not as the villain in my mother's story, but as the one holding the truth. People imagine that growing up in a political family means living surrounded by influence and opportunity. They don't see the silence at the dinner table, the rehearsed smiles, or how a child learns to measure her worth in applause she never receives. My mother cared more about approval ratings than my feelings. My father cared more about avoiding conflict than defending me. Noah was the golden boy, loud, charismatic, endlessly forgiven. I learned early that being quiet kept the peace. My earliest memories of my mother aren't warm. They're of her adjusting her blazer, finding the best light before facing cameras. I followed 2 steps behind, more prop than daughter. She'd rest a hand on my shoulder for the flash, then drop it instantly, as if affection were part of her job, not her instinct. Grandma June was the exception. She'd pull me aside after events, slip me peppermint candies, and whisper, "You don't owe them a performance, sweetheart." I didn't fully understand, but her hugs lasted long enough for me to breathe. As I grew older, the divide between Noah and me widened. His reckless choices were praised as ambition. My careful ones earned warnings not to outshine him. When I won a regional academic award, my mother congratulated Noah for being a positive influence. I stood there with my trophy, feeling invisible and oddly ashamed of succeeding. I moved out as soon as I could. Grandma June visited often, sometimes with muffins, sometimes just to sit with me, but always with a softness no one else in my family offered. One winter afternoon, she sat across from me in my tiny apartment, hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She was quiet for a long time, long enough for me to feel something changing in her. "Mara," she said finally, voice lower than usual, "there are things you'll face someday. Things your mother has been preparing for in all the wrong ways." I frowned, confused. She reached for my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "And when that day comes," she added, "you must be ready." Her eyes held mine, steady, urgent. I didn't realize it then, but that was the moment the ground beneath my life began to shift. I didn't understand Grandma June's warning until months later when her health began to decline. Alzheimer's steals slowly, first small details, then the larger truths. But even as her memory frayed, she never once forgot my name. During her last year, I visited almost every evening after work. I brought her lemon shortbread cookies, read her favorite mystery novels, or simply sat with her while she watched the world outside her window. Those quiet hours were unlike anything in my childhood. No performance, no expectations, just presence. One evening, she asked me to unlock the drawer beside her bed. Inside was a stack of documents in a pale blue folder, her initials stamped in gold. My breath caught when I saw the title, Last Will and Testament of June Ellison. "Grandma, why are you giving this to me?" I whispered. She smiled faintly. "Because you're the only one who's cared for me without asking what you'd get in return." Her words hit deeper than I expected. She motioned for me to read, and as I scanned the pages, everything became clear. She had left it all to me. The real estate, the charitable fund, a long-managed trust account. More than I ever knew she had. Nothing for my mother, nothing for Noah, nothing for my father. It wasn't spite. It was strategy. She'd discovered that my mother's political team had pressured her for money, even tried to divert charitable funds into campaign coffers. She knew exactly what would happen after her death. She knew who would try to take control, and she knew who would fight back. By the time I reached the final page, my hands were shaking. She placed her palm over mine, grounding me. "Listen carefully," she whispered. "Your mother will come for this. Not because she needs it, because she can't stand losing control." The room suddenly felt smaller, the truth too heavy to contain. I swallowed. What am I supposed to do? Her gaze didn't waver. You'll know when the day comes. Back then, her words felt distant, ominous, but far away. I didn't realize that day was already on its way. The days after Grandma June's funeral felt hollow, as if the world had lost the one person who kept it steady for me. My parents hosted a celebration of life that looked more like a networking gala. Caroline delivered a polished speech about compassion and legacy, never mentioning the nights I cared for June or the years she ignored her own mother's calls. I stood at the edge of the crowd watching her glide from conversation to conversation like she was campaigning. Noah posed with donors, angling himself toward the best lighting. Grief wasn't absent, it was inconvenient. 2 days later, my father texted, "Come home tomorrow. We need to discuss the estate. No condolences, no softness, just an order." When I arrived, my mother sat at the dining table with stacks of financial documents she didn't let me see. "We're organizing Grandma's affairs," she said. "We need you to sign a few things so everything runs smoothly." I recognized the tactic immediately, overwhelmed, then pressure. She slid a form toward me, her voice syrupy. "This gives us permission to handle everything on your behalf." Uncover hidden connections. So I started digging quietly, methodically. And what I found didn't just reveal their agendas, it shattered the foundation of their entire world. The investigation didn't start with a dramatic breakthrough. It started with a hunch, one sharp note of instinct, the same one Grandma June always told me to trust. I knew my mother was capable of manipulation, but the precision behind her courtroom performance hinted at something deeper, something prepared long before June had passed. I began with campaign finance records. The public filings were clean, too clean. Caroline's team had curated them like an art exhibit. But hidden in the footnotes of a quarterly disclosure, I found a donation registered through a community partnership group I'd never heard of. Its address traced back to a private law office, and that law office had only one recurring client, Judge Mallory Pierce. The connection wasn't obvious, but the pattern was unmistakable. From there, everything started peeling back like old paint. Avery. My attorney met me late one night after reading the first batch of documents. She didn't say much, she rarely did, but the way she set her coffee down told me she'd seen enough to worry her. "If these are correct," she murmured, tapping a finger against a highlighted section, "your mother isn't just trying to take the inheritance. She's been preparing the entire system to help her." I kept digging campaign receipts, private emails leaked through whistleblower archives, event photos that seemed harmless until I studied the backgrounds. Judge Pierce wasn't just a political ally. She'd attended private dinners at my parents' home fundraisers, disguised as charity event strategy meetings, conveniently undocumented. Noah was present in many of the photos, smiling like he'd earned a seat at a table he never understood. Then came the real hit. Avery called me past midnight. Her voice was tighter than usual. "You need to see this." She sent a file an internal email written by one of my mother's aides. Subject line, "Read June's estate, the plan." The body of the message stated plainly that the family intended to contest the will, regardless of legitimacy, and use Pierce to ensure court cooperation. It even referenced the smear campaign against me months before Noah had begun posting anything. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. This wasn't grief. This wasn't confusion. This was strategy. A coordinated effort to strip me of everything June left. And then another blow. Avery forwarded a video clip from a donor's phone, Judge Pierce stepping into my mother's house during a private fundraiser, 3 weeks before the lawsuit against me was filed. That was the moment the truth solidified. The fight wasn't about money. It was about power and the people who feared losing it. Avery's next words were steady, but carried a pulse beneath them. "Mara, we're not just exposing your family. We're exposing an entire network." The morning of the hearing felt unreal, like walking into a stage play where everyone already knew their lines. Everyone, except me. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, microphones raised toward my mother as she performed grief with picture-perfect precision. Noah walked beside her, jaw tight, trying to look like a supportive son, instead of a man hoping for his share of stolen wealth. Inside the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Judge Pierce sat elevated on the bench, her robe neat, her expression practiced. She looked at my mother with the kind of warmth most people reserve for old friends. My attorney Avery noticed it too, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes unreadable. Caroline opened with a trembling voice. "My daughter exploited a sick woman," she said, hand resting dramatically over her heart. "She manipulated her grandmother, isolated her, and seized control of assets she never deserved." Whispers swept across the room. Cameras clicked. My mother dabbed at non-existent tears, and Noah pushed his chair back just enough to look like he was choking on emotion. Even my father stared straight ahead, refusing to meet my eyes. Judge Pierce leaned forward. Ms. Ellison, these are serious accusations. Your mother deserves justice. There it was, the line she'd prepared. Avery stood slowly. Your Honor, before any arguments continue, the defense would like to submit something for the record. Caroline's eyes sharpened. She knew what was coming. Avery projected the first slide onto the screen, a ledger of political donations connecting a shell organization to Judge Pierce's private committee. A quiet murmur rippled through the room. The judge's posture stiffened. Counselor, what exactly are you implying? Avery clicked to the next slide, a photo. Judge Pierce, stepping through my mother's front door, a wine glass in hand, laughing among donors during a private fundraiser. The timestamp glowed across the corner of the image 3 weeks before our hearing was scheduled. Reporters leaned forward like a wave. Avery didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. We are implying, Your Honor, she said evenly, that you have a conflict of interest so substantial you were legally required to recuse yourself from this case. The judge's face drained of color. My mother shot to her feet. This is taken out of context. Avery cut in her tone cool. There's also this. She opened the next exhibit, the internal email from my mother's aide, detailing the plan to weaponize the court and use Pierce to reclaim the estate. Gasps erupted. One reporter dropped their pen. Judge Pierce stood abruptly. We need a recess. No, Avery replied. Not before the court acknowledges the judicial misconduct and political interference involved in this case. Pierce's gavel trembled in her hand. Noah whispered harshly to my mother. They have everything. My father finally looked at me, really looked, and the shock in his face wasn't anger. It was recognition. Recognition that the daughter he underestimated had just detonated the world they built. The judge exhaled shakily. I must recuse myself, effective immediately. The courtroom erupted, voices colliding, reporters surging, chaos unfolding. But in the center of it all, I felt nothing but stillness. The truth had finally been heard. When the judge stepped down, the courtroom dissolved into chaos. Reporters shouted at my mother, camera flashes burst like lightning, and Noah shoved through the crowd with the panic of someone watching his last lifeline slip away. Avery gathered the exhibits calmly immovable, even in the noise. And through it all, I felt oddly distant, like the storm was happening behind a sheet of glass. The case was reassigned to a higher court with no political ties to my family. The ruling came quickly, almost anticlimactic after everything before it. Grandma June's will was upheld completely. I was named the rightful heir to everything, her properties, charitable accounts, and the trust she had tended for decades. My mother didn't show up for the final ruling. By then, she had bigger problems. The ethics committee launched a full investigation into her finances and her relationship with Judge Pierce. Donations were frozen. Endorsements vanished. Staff resigned. Caroline Ellison, always pristine, always controlled, became a headline for all the wrong reasons. Noah disappeared from social media, the smear campaign now a liability. I heard he told people I had ruined his life, but the truth was simpler. He had survived on illusions, and illusions collapse under scrutiny. My father emailed once, just a few words, I hope we can talk someday. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just the same passivity that defined my childhood. I didn't reply. Some ties don't need cutting, they fall apart on their own once exposed to light. In the following months, I managed the estate, met with accountants, and cleaned out June's properties. It wasn't glamorous or triumphant. It was grounding. For the first time, I felt like I was building something genuinely mine, not inherited expectations or someone else's narrative. One afternoon, while organizing June's study, I found a small box in her desk. Inside was a handwritten note in her looping script. Mara's strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet choice to walk away with your dignity intact. I closed the box gently. Outside, sunlight spilled across her overgrown garden, still beautiful. The world she protected for me finally felt like somewhere I could live, not just defend. I didn't win because I destroyed my family. I won because I wouldn't let them rewrite who I was. And as I locked the house behind me that final evening, something settled in my chest. Not emptiness, not grief. Freedom. In the weeks that followed, my life didn't transform with fireworks or dramatic revelations. It shifted quietly, the way a room feels different once a long-forgotten window is finally opened. The noise around the case faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of rebuilding, of choosing day by day what pieces of my life I wanted to carry forward. I didn't think often about the courtroom or the scandals consuming my mother's career. Not out of denial, but because it no longer belonged to me. For the first time, the weight wasn't mine to hold. People kept expecting me to feel triumphant, but revenge, real revenge, rarely looks like celebration. Sometimes it looks like peace. I visited June's garden every weekend. I trimmed the wild branches, pulled weeds, and touched the stones she once laid by hand. It grounded me, reminding me that my life was no longer defined by the people who tried so hard to control it, but by the woman who trusted me to carry her legacy without losing myself. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, I stood at the edge of the yard and watched the last streaks of light fade across the sky. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something I had to defend. It felt like something I could choose. Maybe that's the real ending. Not victory in court, not the downfall of my family, but the quiet understanding that I survived everything meant to break me, and I didn't become them. I became me.